everyone, my name is Chelsea and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we are talking about the worst books and DNFs of 2023. So I recently posted my best books of 2023. I had so many good reads, but on the other hand, I did have quite a few books that I either did not like or DNF'd in some way, and so we're going to add those together here. We're going to talk about the ones that I really just did not really enjoy in the year of 2023, plus the DNFs. I actually have more DNFs than worst books, which I think is good because some of the DNFs are more like stuff was not for me, not necessarily a bad thing, just stuff that I did not finish. And so yeah, today I know you guys aren't really gonna be able to tell, but it is a very overcast, slightly rainy day today in Phoenix. And so I feel like this is almost perfect weather for this video, except for the fact that I actually love the rain, but outside, like I usually use the outside light source for videos and it is not gonna cooperate just because it is so overcast. But yeah, we're gonna do the worst books first just because I have less of them, and then we'll get into the DNFs. So I actually have 8 books to talk about on my worst list. We are gonna go from like the least worst to the one that I hated the most, because I actually did hate it. They all range from around 2 to 2.5 stars, except for the one that I hated, which I actually gave a 1. Usually in all of my tracking, I only give 1 stars to DNFs so that I can track it as like, this is a DNF. I don't always rate them like that on Goodreads or anything like that half the time, unless it's like an actual bad reason I DNF'd it. I just don't give a rating because I know it was not for me. However, I do have one book that I actively hated and I gave 1 star. So let's get into those worst books. Starting at number 8. I have Girl of Nightmares by Kendara Blake. This is the sequel to Anna Dressed in Blood, which I read 1 or 2 years ago. Wanna say I gave it either a 4 or 4.5. Like I really actually enjoyed that one. I did not enjoy my time in Girl of Nightmares. So book 1, Anna Dressed in Blood, follows our main character of... I'm bad at names. I don't remember. A guy main character who is a teenager. He is sort of like a ghost hunter. He's taken up the family business, like his father used to do this, and he literally goes out and hunts ghosts and like uses a ceremonial dagger sort of thing to send them on. And in the first book, he meets Anna, who is sort of like an evil poltergeist sort of thing, and then stuff happens from there. The book ends, and it actually ends, I feel like, in a pretty good spot. So this is a duology. So Girl of Nightmares is the second book, the finale, and the vibes are 100% different. I did not enjoy my journey at all. I didn't think it was necessary. The actual like characterization that we got from book 1 to book 2 is very different for a lot of the characters, and I think it's partly because of the different like situation they're in. I can't even really get into book 2. Just know that if you're thinking about reading this duology, treat it like a standalone. Just read Anna Dressed in Blood. I really did like that. It is YA horror, so they do have some horrific things going on. Very paranormal, ghosty horror. I really did enjoy that one though. Girl of Nightmares did not need to be written. It did not need to be a thing. I did not enjoy my time with it. I pretend it's a standalone. Coming in at number 7, I actually do own this book still. It's Dust and Grim by Chuck Wendig. I will say a lot of the books on this list for the worst list and for the DNFs, I don't own anymore. However, I forgot to unhaul this in my last unhaul. This is a 2.5, and this is a weird one because of the fact that I actually like Chuck Wendig's Miriam Black series. I have not finished that series, but like I gave the first 3 books in that series, I think 5 stars each back when I read it. Really, really enjoyed it. This is middle grade from him though. I think it's the only middle grade that he has written, and I did not think it quite worked. Like the writing style didn't quite work for me. This is supposed to be like a paranormal graveyard mortuary situation. I didn't really like any of the characters. I didn't like the actual plot line. I read this back in January, so I don't actually remember much about it, except for I was very disappointed in this, and I think it's just because Chuck Wendig should not write middle grade. Like, there was just something about this that did not hit for me, but also did not hit for what I would expect a middle grade audience to want. So I really did enjoy some of his adult stuff, and I want to continue in that series, and I want to read more from him, but as an actual middle grade paranormal creature book, it did not work. Moving into number 6, I do have The Gunslinger by Stephen King. So this is another one I gave 2.5. And I do actually have the book over here somewhere as well, but I'm not going to go get it right now. I probably should. I'm not. But this is something that I read closer to the end of the year in November, and that's part of the reason I have not gotten rid of it yet. But also, I want to continue in this series. I gave this a 2.5 as well. I did not enjoy the writing style of this. I was very confused, especially at the beginning, of what was actually going on, because it's a little bit of a vague writing style. We're following the gunslinger who is following the black man or something like that. He's like a dark wizard or something. I really don't know. I don't know. Following him across the desert, and time is not exactly linear, but it also gets very like sexual and stuff in nature, and again in such a way that it just sort of feels gratuitous. Some of these Stephen King books that I read in 2023 that are earlier in his like writing journey have some choices in them that I just don't 100% enjoy. I will say it's a 2.5 because it wasn't like my least favorite thing that I've ever read from him, and I was very intrigued by the part where Jake was, who is like the kid that comes in partway through the book, and so like I was intrigued by some of the mythology and stuff coming in this story around that, because this is also the first book in the series where the whole series has like, it's almost like the Stephen King universe where like different things come in and like there's references to other books of his, and so like I am still intrigued by it and curious to read more. I think there's even a note or something somewhere by Stephen King saying that like this is not his best writing. Like he knows that this is not a very good book, which I mean, hey, we applaud people being able to recognize their flaws, but I've also heard it gets much better in the series. Like a lot of people enjoy book 2 onward, so I'm still curious, but the writing style and the fact that I didn't know what was going on, and I only really liked one part of the book, and then it was very violent and sexually gratuitous in ways that I didn't think needed to be there, I didn't really like it. Number 5, we're getting now into my like full 2-star ratings. I have Go Hunt Me by Kelly DeVos. So I actually read 2 different books by Kelly DeVos this year. This was the first one I read that I really did not enjoy, and then later in the year I read Eat Your Heart Out, which was better, and that actually was, I think, her debut, which is intriguing to me. Part of it is the writing style. This is a very like unreliable narrator sort of thing, which would not necessarily have been bad, except for after every so often, I don't remember how many chapters or anything, but after every so often we would get an aside of our main character talking to the police because she's like being interrogated about what actually happened in this story, and in those asides she's very evasive, or they will repeat what had happened already in the story or what was going to happen in the story, and so it was a very sort of weird way to pull us out of the story and try and give us more like mystery about it almost, because like they weren't really answering anything, and so when you go into the story expecting a like potential mystery, but then every so often they give you like the interrogation notes and it's almost like they're revealing stuff ahead of time, I just really didn't like that writing style. I did like the writing style of Eat Your Heart Out more, so I'm curious about more from this author, but the actual like way this story was told did not work for me. Okay, I gave in and went and got the next book on the list. I should have just done this earlier because I know what's on my worst list. But going into number 4, we have Salem's Lot by Stephen King. So this is a much thicker one, and actually this edition is from the UK, and it has extra stuff in the back that I eventually read, I think like in Night Shift and something else. So this book ends a little bit quicker than you would think. Like, it feels like there's extra stuff here. It ends like sort of on page 676, but it goes to like 700 and something. This is a book about Salem's Lot, Jerusalem's Lot, that has vampires, and it was so boring. I was really expecting more from a vampire story. This is actually more of a like small town horror. Again, not even horror, maybe just like an unsettling feeling, but they go through so many different people in the town. Like, they go from like, this person did this today, and then this person did this, and it goes and goes and goes and goes. And so a lot of this was just talking about the different people in the town, especially at the beginning, and then when they eventually do introduce the vampires, because it is a vampire story, it says like, do you believe in vampires? It is a vampire story. We get to a part where it's like part 2 or part 3, where literally that part is like, and then people started turning into vampires. Such and such was a vampire, such and such was a vampire, such and such was a vampire, and it was just like, really? We went so long and had so much description about the so many individual people in town, and then when we actually get to the vampires and like the stuff that should have been creepy paranormal stuff, it was glossed over. And so I was so bored throughout this. I did not feel any sort of tension like I should have. Another thing that I think is more maybe my thing, I don't know, but a lot of the Stephen King stuff that I read around the 70s and 80s had a lot to do with religion as well. So while this was vampires, we had like a Catholic priest and things like that, and so a lot of it was waxing poetic about religion and what that means for vampires. And so it wasn't even necessarily that it was being used against them in a way, it was just a lot of commentary that I didn't particularly care for, and so I did not like this one. I'm sure it's supposed to be like atmospheric and things like that, but I just felt like it was too long, and I really pushed myself to finish this. I did not like it. Coming in at number 3, I have Resolutions by Lucy Eden. So this is a short sort of romance book that I read on January 1st of 2023. It's been over a year, so I'm going to try and make my thoughts as coherent as possible. But this is one that just really did not work for me. Part of it, I think, is because it was so short. I want to say it was very short and might have also had some like epilogue sort of stuff, like extra epilogues at the end. But it was a romance that was basically these two characters who I think were friends, and one of them had a crush on the other one, and they go on this like New Year's trip, and throughout most of the story, the guy is coming on to the girl, but he has a girlfriend. She knows that he has a girlfriend, and there's just like such problematic aspects to this story. And I just want to say, spoilers, maybe, I mean, we're talking about my worst books here. It turns out that he like dumped this other girl like the day before he goes on the trip with the new girl, and so he doesn't actually have a girlfriend anymore, but like he didn't want to explain this to her. And so the writing style was just not giving me enough. The novella nature of it was not giving me enough, and then I did not like the characters and how he went about trying to introduce this new relationship to the girl that we had here, because she's under the impression that he's still in a relationship and he's coming on to her and expecting her to just know that she likes him enough that it shouldn't matter, even though he did technically break up with the other girl. This is just one of those things where, like, to me, it was a little bit worse of a sin than how boring Salem's Lot was, but they both still got 2 stars and I did not like them. Coming in at number 2, I have Thinner by Stephen King. This one is very problematic. First of all, it uses the slur for Romani people because of the fact that this was written like in the 70s. It is something that back in the day, people said. It wasn't used exactly the same way that we now know. Like I do want to say this is partly slur-ish because of the fact that this is about a guy who's not very nice, and he gets cursed to be thinner. And when I say that he's not very nice, we have lots of like fat phobic sort of talk in here, ableism, racism. It's not a good book in that way. There's a lot of stuff to deeply unpack in here, and so it was a very uncomfortable read, even knowing that it was published at a time where a lot of this kind of stuff was sort of more mainstream. It is one of the shorter ones by Stephen King, so I don't think it took me very long to read, but it was not a good read. And then moving into number one. Number one is, you guessed it, also Stephen King. So this is the book that I gave 1 star. I really actively disliked it, and it's going to be Rage by Stephen King. So this, I will say, again, I do like the fact that Stephen King is very able to acknowledge his shortcomings. This book is no longer in print. It is not something that you can get unless you actually get it in a used copy of the Bachman books. Like, you have to actually get it used. The Bachman books that are printed now, like a collection called the Bachman books, does not have Rage in it anymore, because Stephen King knows that it is not something that was appropriate. He wrote this back when he was like a teenager, and it was published, but he knows how problematic it is. So I do want to at least acknowledge that, because I think there is again, something online where you can actually find the way he speaks about it. But this is a story about a boy in high school who decides to take a gun to class and kill some teachers and take the class hostage. And the way that this is discussed and the way that it is used, like, he tries to blame his parents for his problems, he tries to blame mental illness, he tries to blame lots of stuff that is, the way it's being talked about is not great. But also the way that these students see him, they sort of look up to him because he's willing to do these kind of things. And there's this one boy in class who is like, hey, should we actually be entertaining the idea that he has a gun in class and like actually listening to him? And everybody hates this kid that seems to be the only one that has a brain. And so there's a lot in here. Like, just, I can't even form words right now because of the fact that, like, everything about it was problematic. Everything was disgusting. It was very misogynistic. It was very fat phobic and ableist. And like, the guy that's in it is horrible. Like, not only, and again, spoilers, I guess, if you want to try and read this, but not only did he come to school with a gun and kill a teacher and things like that, the reason he came to school with a gun and killed a teacher is because he was going to be suspended for previously, like a few days before or whatever, coming to school and trying to beat up his teacher to death. Like, again, this is a kid that was already showing instability in violence, and he was basically just going to get a slap on the wrist. Like, he was still allowed to go back to class. He was just going to be like, hey, you can't do that. And so he decided to go on a killing spree / kidnap the class. And just the way that he talks about stuff and the way that he tries to make this justifiable was horrible. And again, like I said, Stephen King knows this is not a good book. It was pulled from publication. You cannot even get it anymore. But, and I guess teenage boys, it was one of the first things that he wrote. I don't know how much editing it went through before it actually got published in like the 70s, but it's not good. I actively hated it. Some of these books, obviously, half of this list, more than half of this list, is Stephen King. A lot of these things, if I was just reading them without trying to do a Stephen King project, I would have DNF'd because they were not for me. They were not good. But yeah, I actively hated Rage. Okay, let's calm down a little bit. Let's move on from the worst books of the year, and let's go to my DNFs. There's no Stephen King in these DNFs, so that's great. I'm actually just going to be taking these in order of when I read them, because there's not necessarily anything to rank here. It's not like I liked one more than the other because I just DNF'd all of them. I have 11 DNFs here to talk about. I will say that the least amount of pages I gave any of these books was 35, so I read at least 35 pages in every single book that I DNF'd, and the most pages that I read was 171, so almost 200 pages. It ran the gamut. I either DNF'd at like 35 or almost 200 and somewhere in between. So In January, I DNF'd Damaged by Becca Vincenza. This is an indie, like, new adult romance type of thing, but it has, like, a girl that had been kidnapped because of some sort of power maybe that she had, and we start off the story with, like, these guys saving her, but she's very distrustful, you know, etc, etc. I personally just didn't really like the way the story was being set up. It felt like it was taking too long to get into, like, what I assumed the story was going to be, and so I just knew that this one was probably not going to be for me, so I DNF'd. Then in February, I DNF'd The Trouble with Friends by Cheryl Phipps. This is another indie romance, contemporary romance, that I got probably during a Stuff Your Kindle event the year before sometime, and I DNF'd this one because of the writing style. It was just not something that I really liked, and then it was also one of those ones where it was like the girl had a crush on the guy and they were best friends, and then the guy was going to develop a crush on the girl, except for everything that I had read up to when I DNF'd was always talking about her body and her boobs and, like, things like that, and I just could not stand these sort of, like, lust and objectification versus actually developing a romance with this person who is supposed to be his best friend, who he was supposed to never have looked at before, and then the reason he was going to fall in love with her was because he realized she was hot. Like, I don't know. I DNF'd this. Then I DNF'd 2 books in April. One was Rosewater by Tade Thompson. This is one that I was very intrigued to read because it's an adult sort of sci-fi one. However, the main character is very misogynistic, and I did not enjoy my time in his head. I also did not get to any sort of point where I understood the sci-fi city setting, and I wasn't sure that I really wanted to. Like, the way that he talks about, like, a pregnant coworker and things like that just really turned me off of it, and so I DNF'd. I also DNF'd Spock Messiah by Theodore R. Cogswell and Charles A. Spano Jr. This is a Star Trek book that I don't think I've ever DNF'd a Star Trek novel. They're not 100% great. Like, I've had some ones that were 2 stars, I've had some ones that are 3, and a couple 4s and 5s. Like, they run the gamut because they have so many different authors. However, this one was literally trying to make Spock the, like, next god at some sort of planet, and he wasn't even in the book. Like, I ended up reading, how much did I read? 40 pages of this one, so one of the lower ones, but I read like 40 pages, didn't really see much characterization that I would come to know and expect from a Star Trek novel. Like, the characters didn't feel the right way. We had people talking about, like, lust and sex and stuff, and then bringing Spock into the equation because of, like, him acting differently, and it just got to the point where I read some reviews and realized that, yeah, this one was one that I guess is a lot of people's not so much favorite. Like, people didn't like the characterization and stuff, and because I was already at that point where I was like, I didn't realize this was supposed to be an actual, like, somehow Spock thinks he is, like, the next god and building a religion around him on some planet, I DNF'd this. I also DNF'd 2 books in May. The first one was In the Ravenous Dark by A.M. Strickland. This one I read quite a bit. I read like 169 pages. This was like my book club pick for that month, and I DNF'd it. A lot of people that read it with me either didn't 100% love it or they did DNF it as well. And this is one that I went in expecting big things. Like, it was supposed to have like different queer identities, and it was like a dark fantasy world, which I know is not 100% my thing, but my biggest issue with this was it's YA, and they were trying to be very like open and sexual about stuff. Like, we had lots of descriptions up to like where I DNF'd about like sexy feelings and like things that I just didn't feel comfortable with, knowing that the kids in the book were supposed to be like under 18, especially with like the dark nature of stuff. I've also heard some crazy things happen near the second half of the book that people didn't expect, and I was okay DNFing this one. The other one I DNF'd in May was Nophek Gloss by Essa Hansen, another adult sci-fi one. This one got dark very, very quickly, which was okay, but my biggest thing with this is I did not understand a single thing that was happening. I got 69 pages into this and I was confused the entire time. We got introduced to multiple different people, multiple different alien races. Like, I think it was a queer normative world, which is great, but I did not understand what I was reading. I think it was the writing style. Like, I could not tell you a single thing that happened, except for I think some people died near the beginning of the book. I could not wrap my brain around the way the story was being told. Then I also DNF'd 2 books in July. The first was Charming by Jade Linwood. This was actually an arc, and I felt bad DNFing, but at the same time, this one had some problematic elements. It was supposed to be like a mix between John Tucker Must Die and Shrek, like a fairy tale world about like Prince Charming who goes and rescues princesses, but then like absconds with their money instead of marrying them and goes and does it all again and again and again. It had some very like weird, I think ableist and fat phobic sort of stuff. Like, we have a side character to Prince Charming who I feel like potentially could have been a magical, fantastical race of a character, and maybe I just didn't get to the reveal of that, but he was being talked about in a very like put down, disrespectful way, and I just wasn't entirely too sure I liked that. And then we eventually get to, I think it's Rapunzel's story, and they talk about her being in an orphanage and how there were a couple kids with disabilities. I think one was specifically like her leg didn't work the right way, and they were talking about it in a way that was very ableist and sort of disgusting to me about being adopted or not being adopted because of certain things. And so I just got to the point where I was like, you know what? I don't care what else happens in this story, because I was upset at those instances, so I DNF'd. The other one I DNF'd in July is Wolf Gone Wild by Juliet Cross. This one is purely not a book for me. This is an indie paranormal romance. This had, I think, a witch and a werewolf. My biggest thing personally was just the werewolf. He was like stuck in his human form, and so he has like a separate alpha wolf voice in his head, which is very much like a rip her clothes off sort of thing, and I just could not stand that. Like, that's not my vibe with romance, and so I don't think it was written bad at all. It was just, I knew, not my type of book. I DNF'd 1 book in August, which was Blackwater by Jeanette Arroyo and Ren Graham. This is actually like a graphic novel that I think I rented from my library. Like, I got it loaned out from the library because I saw it on Instagram in some way. I don't even remember who I saw it with. It was supposed to be like LGBTQ, sort of like dark, paranormal, maybe Riverdale-esque sort of thing. It also is very sort of ableist and homophobic in ways, with characters that I think are supposed to eventually fall in love, and I just really could not get around some of those aspects, so I DNF'd it, because I literally could not read more from that sort of perspective, knowing that these two characters were eventually supposed to like get together. It was just the way things were being talked about was very problematic for me. Then in October, I DNF'd 1, which was Maplecroft by Sherry Priest. This is a book that, again, I think was just purely not for me. It was supposed to be like Lizzie Borden, but Lovecraftian, sci-fi, horror, and I will say I did not get to any of the sci-fi horror stuff. I only got 35 pages into this one and realized it was not my thing. It is set in the past, obviously, and I do not like when we get to very like classic flowery language like Charles Dickens and that kind of thing, like that kind of trying to put it there. And it was purely, at least for the parts that I read, written in letters. I do not like that either, and so it was a lot of like, back in the day, this is what happened, and it wasn't really giving me any sort of like motivation to want to read more. Also, I'm not 100% into the Lovecraftian sci-fi era stuff, and I didn't realize it was Lovecraftian more than just like horror until after I decided to DNF and read some reviews and things, and I was like, you know what, it really is just not my thing. And then finally, I DNF'd 1 book in December, which is Sugar and Snow by Irene Davis. This is another indie romance sort of one that is supposed to be like a future take on the Nutcracker, so like after the original Nutcracker happened, where our main character falls in love with the Mouse King instead of the Nutcracker, I didn't 100% love the writing style for this. It was another one that was trying to be a little bit more like in the past with it, but it wasn't necessarily just that. We got introduced to the Nutcracker and the Mouse King, and I just did not like either character. Like, the way that they were described did not sound appealing for either character either way in regards to a romance. So I was like, you know what? I'm good. We're gonna DNF this one too. And so yeah, those are the 11 books that I DNF'd in 2023. Again, some things had some problematic elements and I just could not continue. Other things were just not my jam. And so yeah, I think that is everything for today. Let me know your worst book or a book that you DNF down below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up to let me know. Subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more videos. I do have videos coming out on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so I will see you then. Bye!